Don't open that envelope. Whatever you do, do not open it until you're somewhere safe. And do not breathe a word of this to your father." That was the voicemail my grandmother left me the night she died. I didn't hear it until 3 days after her funeral, because I'd dropped my phone in the parking lot of the hospital, and the screen had shattered so badly I couldn't unlock it. By the time I got it repaired, we'd already buried her, already eaten the sandwiches at the reception, already stood around in my aunt's living room listening to my father talk about what a remarkable woman she was. All of that had already happened. And then I sat in my car in a Canadian Tire parking lot in Sudbury, Ontario, and heard her voice for the last time and felt the ground shift beneath me. My grandmother's name was Harriet. She raised me from the time I was 9 years old, after my mother left and my father made it clear he didn't have the bandwidth. That was the word he used. Bandwidth, like I was a file too large to download, for a daughter on top of everything else he had going on. She was 71 years old when she died, sharp as she'd ever been, and she'd been planning something. I understand that now. I found the envelope 2 weeks later, tucked inside a copy of Anne of Green Gables she'd kept on her nightstand for as long as I could remember. It was sealed with tape, not just the adhesive flap, and she'd written my name on the front in her careful cursive. Not my nickname, not the shortened version everyone used. My full legal name, Cassandra Joy Whitmore. Inside was a letter 4 pages handwritten on her good cream stationery, and a folded document I didn't understand at first. Not fully. Let me back up, I'm 41 years old. I've worked as a forensic accountant for 13 years, the last 7 with a firm in Toronto that handles fraud investigations and estate disputes. The irony of what I'm about to tell you is not lost on me. I have spent my entire career helping other people follow the money, untangle the lies, find the moment where someone made a choice to take what wasn't theirs. It never once occurred to me to look at my own family that way. You don't, do you? You assume the people who raised you are playing by the same rules you are. My grandmother had set up a trust for me when I was born. My grandfather established it before he passed. I was 3, I don't remember him, and the terms were simple. The money was to be held until I turned 30, at which point I would receive the full amount plus whatever it had earned. My grandmother was the trustee. When she died, trusteeship was supposed to transfer to an independent administrator at the credit union where the account was held. Supposed to. What her letter explained, in her careful, unhurried handwriting, was that my father had convinced her, sometime around when I turned 28, to sign an amendment to the trust documents that named him as co-trustee. She said she hadn't understood what she was signing. She said he'd told her it was just a formality, something the credit union needed for tax purposes. She said she'd asked him 3 times if it would affect my inheritance, and he'd said no, absolutely not, Mom, it's just paperwork. She wrote, I believed him because I wanted to believe him. He is my son. I am telling you this now because I think he has taken the money, and I cannot prove it, and I am running out of time. She was right. He had, and she was right about the other part too. I sat in my car in that parking lot and read those 4 pages twice. Then I drove to my office, which was 40 minutes away, and I sat at my desk for a long time before I did anything at all. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand that I didn't fly off the handle. I didn't call him. I didn't do anything impulsive. I opened my laptop and I started pulling records. What I found over the next 3 weeks would have made my clients sick to their stomachs. The trust had been established with $180,000 in 1983, the year I was born. My grandfather had been a machinist who worked overtime for 40 years and never spent money on anything frivolous, and that $180,000 was essentially his life savings, earmarked for me specifically because he believed, apparently, that I was the one in the family who would need it most. By 2013, when I should have received it at age 30, the account, with 30 years of compound interest, should have held somewhere in the neighborhood of $620,000. The balance when I finally got access to the records was $4,200. In a trust that had been growing for 3 decades, I stared at that number for a very long time. Then I printed it out, put it in a folder, and kept going. The amendment my grandmother had signed in 2011 had given my father co-signing authority on all disbursements. Over the following 2 years, 2011 and 2012, he had made 47 withdrawals from the trust account. The amounts varied. Some were $3,000, some were $22,000. One, in November of 2012, was $85,000. Each one was documented with a memo line that read trust administration expenses, or legal and accounting fees, or, in one case that made my hand shake, beneficiary support payment. I was the beneficiary. I never received a cent. I want to be clear about something. I had no idea any of this money existed. My grandmother never told me about the trust when I was growing up. I think she was afraid of what it would mean for me to know, afraid I'd feel like I was waiting for something, or that my father would find out I knew and find some way to access it sooner. She'd kept it completely separate, mentioned nothing, and by the time I was old enough that it might have come up naturally, my relationship with my father was already so distant that we rarely talked about anything real. He'd remarried when I was 12. His wife, a woman I will be diplomatic and simply call remote, had made it clear from the beginning that she considered me a complication. Not openly, not in any way you could point to and say, there, that's the moment. It was quieter than that. The kind of thing where you're always slightly outside the warmth. Where there's never quite enough room for you at the table. Where Christmas gifts are an afterthought and school events are schedule conflicts. I stopped trying around 16. I moved in with a friend's family for my last 2 years of high school, and then I went to university in Ottawa and I just built a different life, one that didn't include him much. He'd called me last spring, which was unusual. We spoke maybe 4 times a year. He said my grandmother's estate was almost settled and there were a few documents he needed me to sign. Standard stuff, he said, just closing out some accounts, releasing him from executor duties. He emailed me a PDF. I almost signed it without reading it carefully, because that's what you do when someone you half trust sends you paperwork, and your life is busy and you're in the middle of a project at work. I almost signed it. What stopped me was the section at the bottom, almost buried in the legal language, where I was asked to confirm that I had received all assets to which I was entitled under any and all testamentary or trust instruments executed by Harriet June Whitmore or Douglas Arthur Whitmore, and that I released the estate and all related parties from any further claims. Any and all trust instruments. I read that line 4 times. Then I closed the PDF and called my grandmother's number out of pure reflex before remembering she wouldn't answer. Then I sat very still for a while. I didn't sign the document. I told my father I needed a bit more time to review everything with my own accountant. A lie, but a useful one, and he said of course, no rush, and asked if I was coming to visit for Thanksgiving. I said I'd let him know. He said great, and we hung up, and I went back to work and tried not to think about what I'd almost done. It was 3 days later that I got my phone repaired and heard my grandmother's voicemail. There is a particular feeling that comes when the pieces fit together. I've felt it at work 100 times. That moment when you're looking at a spreadsheet and the pattern reveals itself, and you know, without any more doubt, what happened. It's not a good feeling, exactly. It's more like the opposite of relief, like something you were hoping wasn't true has just confirmed that it is. My grandmother had known. She'd known and she'd been trying to tell me, and the envelope had been her way of leaving me what I needed. The document inside, the folded one, was a copy of the original trust deed, dated 1983. With all of the terms clearly laid out, including a clause, my grandfather had apparently been a careful man, stating that any amendment to the trust required written consent from the beneficiary once she reached the age of majority. I was never asked to consent. I was never told the amendment existed. That clause made the 2011 amendment invalid, which meant every disbursement made under it was unauthorized, which meant my father had spent 30 years of my grandfather's savings without any legal authority to do so. I need to tell you about the week I spent deciding what to do, because it wasn't simple. I have a colleague, I'll call her a friend actually, because she is, who does estate litigation. We'd gone through articling together years ago and she knew me well enough to notice when something was wrong. I called her on a Wednesday evening and talked for 2 hours. She didn't try to make it easier than it was. She said, "You know what this means. You know where this goes." And I said yes. And she said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Not because she was telling me to let it go. She was asking me if I was ready for what it would cost me emotionally to do it right. I thought about my grandmother's voice on that voicemail. Careful, even at the end. Don't open it until you're somewhere safe. I told my friend yes, I was sure. What followed was not fast. Estate fraud cases in Ontario are not resolved over a weekend. We filed a formal complaint with the Law Society in September. My father had used a lawyer to execute the trust amendment, and we had reason to believe that lawyer had known the consent clause was being circumvented. We engaged a forensic accounting firm, not my own employer because of the obvious conflict, and they reconstructed the full transaction history. We made an application to the Ontario Superior Court of Justice to have the trust amendment declared void and to seek recovery of the misappropriated funds. My father hired a lawyer almost immediately, which told me he'd been expecting this. People who have clean consciences don't retain counsel within 48 hours of being notified of a claim. His lawyer sent a letter saying he was prepared to demonstrate that all trust expenditures had been made in the best interests of the beneficiary and that documentation was available upon request. I sent back a one-line response through my own legal team. Please provide all documentation. The documentation they provided was creative. I'll give them that. There were invoices from a property management company I'd never heard of for property maintenance services, related to a cottage property. A cottage I didn't own and had never visited. There were receipts from an accounting firm that dissolved in 2015 for estate planning consultations. There were records of what appeared to be payments to a numbered company that, when my friend dug into it, traced back to a holding company in which my father's wife was the sole director. The money hadn't just been spent. It had been laundered through a series of paper transactions designed to look from a distance like legitimate trust expenses. I spent 4 days with our forensic team going through every document they'd produced. It was some of the most methodical, painstaking work I'd done in my career, and I was doing it for myself, which made it feel strange in a way I hadn't expected. There were moments when I had to put down my pen and walk away from the table, because the sheer scale of the planning, the deliberateness of it, was hard to sit with. This wasn't a moment of weakness or an impulsive bad decision. This was something my father had structured over years. He had looked at his daughter's inheritance and decided it was available to him. I want to say I was only angry, but the truth is there was grief in it too. Grief for the grandfather I never knew, who had worked all those years to leave me something. Grief for my grandmother, who had caught on too late and had spent the last years of her life knowing what her son had done and not knowing how to stop it. Grief for the version of my life where that money had arrived when it was supposed to, when I was 30, when I was paying off student loans and starting my career and trying to figure out how to establish myself and what that might have changed. I didn't let the grief make my decisions, but I let myself feel it. The matter went before a judge in February of this year. I want to be honest with you. I was not in that courtroom to reconcile. I was not there to have a conversation. I was there because my grandfather had worked 40 years to leave me something. And my father had taken it, and that deserved to be answered in the right way, through the right process, by someone with the authority to say what it was. The judge agreed with our application. The 2011 amendment was declared void. The trust was found to have been misappropriated in full. My father was ordered to make restitution in the amount of $618,400, the calculated value of the trust corpus plus 30 years of compound interest, minus the $4,200 that remained, plus legal costs. His lawyer had argued that he lacked the personal assets to satisfy a judgment of that size. That turned out to be partially true. His personal accounts held considerably less than the judgment amount. However, the forensic trail we'd uncovered was detailed enough that the court also ordered a tracing of the funds through the numbered company to the holding company where they'd ultimately landed, which meant his wife's assets were examined, which meant the vacation property in Muskoka they'd purchased in 2014, the year after the last major trust disbursement, was now part of the picture. Property records in Ontario are public. The Muskoka property had been purchased for $340,000 in 2014 and was assessed at considerably more than that now. It was ordered for sale as part of the judgment recovery. I did not attend the sale. I didn't need to see it. My friend called me when it was done and I thanked her and sat for a few minutes with a cup of tea I'd made and let it be real. The total recovery was $591,000, which after legal fees left me with something close to what the trust would have provided. Not exact, nothing like this is ever exact, but close enough that I could feel my grandfather's intentions in it, the stubborn, steady determination of a man who'd wanted to make sure his granddaughter would be all right. My father has not contacted me since the judgment. His wife sent one email, through his lawyer, asking me to consider what I had done to the family. I read it once and did not respond. There is nothing to say to that. I didn't destroy anything. I uncovered what was already destroyed. Here is what I've been thinking about since all of this concluded. My grandmother left me that voicemail, knowing she might not get another chance to talk to me. She hid that envelope carefully enough that no one else would find it. She wrote 4 pages by hand because she was afraid a typed document could be challenged, could be claimed as something she hadn't written herself. She was protecting me from beyond her own ability to protect me in person. I never got to thank her. That's the part I sit with. I've thought too about the version of me that signs that PDF without reading it. It would have taken me 15 seconds. I almost did it 3 separate times before that clause caught my eye. There are thousands of people who inherit something they never knew existed, and who sign away their rights to it before they understand what they're giving up. It happens in probate courts across this country every year. People trust the family member handling the estate because they don't know yet that trust has to be earned, not assumed. I keep the copy of Anne of Green Gables on my own nightstand now. The envelope is still inside it, empty, but there, some nights I take it out and hold it for a minute. My grandmother's handwriting on the front, my full name, in her careful cursive, like she was making sure I'd pay attention. She knew me well, she knew what she was doing. I am 41 years old and I came into my inheritance late, and strangely, and through channels I would never have chosen. But I have it now. And more than the money, more than any of it, I have the knowledge that my grandfather's work was not wasted, and my grandmother's final act was not in vain, and that the careful, stubborn insistence on doing things correctly is never, in the end, a small thing. The sun was coming through my kitchen window the morning my friend called to tell me the sale had closed. I was drinking coffee I'd made myself, in my own apartment, in the city I'd chosen. I thought about the 9-year-old girl who'd arrived at her grandmother's door with a bag of clothes and no explanation, and I thought about everything that girl had figured out on her own. She did all right,